Welcome to the presentation about overlays. For those who came to this talk because they wanted to hear something about language overlays, I have to point you because it's not going to be about language overlays only. There was a mistake. Uh, um, so actually, I'm talking about overlays in general and where Typo 3 is using that. So my name is Benny. Um, I I don't have a slide about myself, but I do Typo 3 for a very, very long time, very, very, very long time. And I've seen all the problems, and I try to fix most of the problems with language and workspace overlays. That's why I do this talk, because I feel like I don't very so if you don't like that, I don't mind. If you're really up for the deep stuff, you might also be disappointed because I'm not going to detail for all the special edge cases, because I'm here to explain the principles and how it works, but also from a technical point of view. So this is what you on this talk, and I'm really happy for feedback. What was missing. From my side, it's still a bit complicated to explain. So today I want to tell you what overlays are and what kind of overlays exist. Check. For translations and workspaces, and how it works under the hood, and why Typo 3 is actually doing this whole stuff with workspaces, with overlays, and also how we can code so everything works fine. Okay, so overlays are used in Typo 3. Before I'm explaining what are overlays, I just tell you where they are used for translation handling and workspace handling. So in case you're lucky and you only use Typo 3 for websites with one language, the default language, and no workspaces, this is completely new for you. And for the ones who actually use either multi-language sites or workspaces or both, then you will understand how the stuff that you've been using works under the hood. So in version 9, we introduced an API called Context API, and it's a singleton that has state that is modified during the request lifecycle, and it contains various aspects, stuff like, am I logged in? Is there a backend user logged in? And also what language is requested by the URL or something like that, or what kind of workspace am I currently in? So do I need to explain workspaces in a... No? Because I can do a whole session about workspaces. And it's great, of course. So I won't do that. Okay, I will do that. 2 sentences about workspaces. Workspace is actually a system extension in Typo 3 where you can create a database record like any other database record, and the database record is called sysworkspace. And of course, with the TCA record, you have UID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you can have multiple workspaces, like a workspace for editing the About Us section. You have a workspace to change the menu structure. You have a workspace for previewing your blog posts and review them, and you can manage your content before it's published. The poor man's workspace is actually the disabled or hidden functionality. So you have a page that is to it unhide, and workspaces is a bit more sophisticated. And you can have multiple workspaces, and that's why you have the workspace ID. Same with languages, you can have multiple languages. So back in the day, you had a default language with the language UID 0, and everything else you configured in TypoScript. Yay. The cool thing about TypoScript is that you have TypoScript conditions, and then that means you can never understand what kind of TypeScript is actually available except for the current request. So The typical settings you had was syslanguage UID equals 3, syslanguage content, and then there was this syslanguage mode, and I always try to find out which one is what and what combination I need. So in total, there are 4 different use cases or modes you can choose for, and these options do not exist anymore because now we have side handling. So in case you've worked with Typo3 and saw that's because of me. I came up with 3 different language overlay types: strict, fallback, and free. And that's actually where overlays. Oh, there's actually overlay in there, and that's exactly what I want to explain today. But I can talk about this screen for 10 minutes, or I can just show you a random website where you have a website in the front end with /Mac, and it's English, and it has in our Typo3 setup, of course, a default language, and it's currently, of course, in live workspace because that's what I'm previewing. And then you have a German translation with /DE/Mac, of course, also in the live workspace. So it's actually the default language, and you translate from this to another. In the database, it looks like this. You have a page with a UID 15, that's /Mac. It's on some other page, and it has the syslanguage UID filled with 0. That's the default language, in our case, English. And it has another field, L10N parent. So the 10 is short for localization. That's the 10 letters between the L and the 10 and the N. It's no joke. So okay, side fun fact is that that's the field you see everywhere except for the database table TT content, because the guy who invented Typo3 mixed the L10N with another word, I18N. So I18N stands for internationalization. I, 18 letters, N. And he somehow confused it. So in the database tables, you have L10N parent, but for TT content, you have L18N parent, and we'll keep it because of backwards compatibility. So what we see is that that's something we call the default language is the 0, and the L10N parent points from the number 16 points to the 15. Quite easy to understand. We have a pointer. The L10N parent is the pointer field. In TCA, it's called translation pointer field, I guess, because it points to the default language. So easy, right? But no overlays. That's just translation handling, how Typo3 is doing this kind of stuff. But it's key if you look at this strict, free, and fallback thingy. So what happens if we call the URL /Mac? Some magic in some middleware finds out that /Mac is actually the page with the ID 15 in the default language. And because there's no prefix for the language or separate main, we just say, cool, we'll just render this page, everything that's 15. Because there's no prefix, we have just records TT content, whatever we have, with language UID equals 0. That's the best and easiest way. But then you have /DE/Mac. And so there's one thing that happens. It actually also detects that we're on page 15. But because there's the /DE, our context API remembers, hey, we're on language German, 3. So we're not on default language. We want language 3. So we check, because we know in the site configuration /DE is number 3. So we'll actually check for a page that's L10N parent 15 and language UID 3, because we can have a lot of languages in one system. So who has the most pages? That's, of course, a great contest. you have the maximum you ever had? Or 25? Who more? 26? 32? 120. That's what I wanted to hear. Anybody? So I was with 80. So 120, Lukas, you're the winner. So we have a number, so we can go up as much as we want. And that's why we need to check not just for the LTN parent, but also for the language UID 3. Because my simple example before, of course, can have multiple UIDs, but I don't want to confuse you with more stuff. We just work with English and German. Here comes the interesting part. We found the record with LTN parent 15 and language 3. That was the one with the 16. And we just take everything. We're just working with PHP arrays. And at this point, we've done a second SQL query to get the row. And we just take everything we got back from the German one and replace everything that is in the array except for the UID field. This is where we keep the 15. And but we also want to know that we actually translated this. That's why we have this great magic field called overlay UID. And that's where everything is kept, or where we know, oh, this is actually a translated version. So it's like ID 15. We just keep the ID 15 and we store overlay UID in 16. Why do we do this? Sometimes we link to a page and we want to link, we always link to the page with the ID 15, or in this case 15 of course, to the default language and not to the translation, because Typo 3 is doing the translation automatically. That's on page, on a page level if you link to another page, or if you choose a news record, you also choose typically, so we're not talking about the edge cases, you're also linking to another news, and that's also the default language. But the question would be, what happens if the page is not translated? Oh, we're here for the language fallback. What happens? We're still requesting 15 with the /DE Mac. You know, I can just delete the page translation. Oh, we want language 3, and then we look for the language 3 LTN parent 15, but we didn't find anything. But the default language is configured in the fallback chain, and that's why we keep the record and say that's totally fine, and we just return the content with the English language and not with the German language. We don't have one. Sometimes people want this. My favorite case is you have the default language, you have German, and then you have Swiss German. Do we have any Swiss people here? No? Okay. Oh. One person. You have customers from Switzerland. So they have this, they also have German, but it's a different German, especially they use different words for things. For instance, Angebot, it's like an offer, and they have this word Offerte. So you basically say, I can translate all of my 1,000 pages from German to Swiss German. That's how you get to the 120 languages, because you also add Swiss German, but you're just like, no, I don't see the benefit of translating everything to Swiss German. So you actually do the fallback to German. That's the fallback chain where you want to use it, because just show everything in German, except for this one page where we use the Offerte word. And that's how you can, or you have a different imprint or something like that. That's where you use the fallback chain, and that's how people use it. So that's actually okay. I will go back in a second. So there are a couple of things you need to know now. You get the red slides. It's that you need to understand that the overlays mechanism that I just showed you is we're just exchanging all data except the UID field. from the translated content and puts everything in the original record and just like, hey, just keep it like this. And then we have language fallback. And that's actually what you need to know. If you want to do language fallbacks, you need to have overlays. So in case you didn't, get this, which is okay, we always take the default language. What would happen if we would take the ID 16 right away? Because if we don't have the translation, how will we know that we want to do a fallback? We need to know the default language and then do the overlays in order to achieve what people consider a fallback. So if we just take, hey, give me everything in Swiss German, there would be nothing, like, because there's nothing translated except for Offerte, right? So we need to always get to the one that we actually do the fallback to and do the overlays. So overlays is the opposite of fallback, but it's actually the same. It's just a technology under the hood. So summarized, if overlays, if the translation doesn't exist, we just keep the original one, and that's what we call the fallback. And then there's the strict mode, which is if there's no translation found, we just don't show the content at all. So in most of my projects, I use the strict mode because French people don't want to see Spanish content or English content. They just want to see, give me the French stuff, and that's it. If it's not translated, it's not there. That's strict. And fallback, is for the Swiss people. But that's a common one I've seen for a long time. So there are a couple of things that are really good about this, because we always link to the default language ID, and all the records, of course, the famous news records, are always on the PID of the default language. Doesn't matter if you translate it and delete the translation and re-add the translation, they're always stored on the PID. And currently, there are a lot of other ways to achieve that, but for typo 3, it's the only way to achieve fallbacks by having overlays. The other thing that's really important. Oh, Stefan wanted to take a photo. It's relevant is that the reason why there's this YAML file, and some people don't like YAML files, for the site configuration is that it's one place and it's always available even without the database, where all the configuration about the language for a site is stored. So we can use it in the backend and in the front end. And in my opinion, that's the source of truth. That's where you configure for each language the fallback, the strict mode, or the free mode. I'll go into the free mode in a second. Free mode is actually when you say, hey, I don't care about the default language for my TT content records. I just want everything with language 3 in that order. It doesn't matter, because hopefully there's nothing translated. It's something completely different. Sometimes I have this with Spain actually, because they do something else and they just like, I don't care about whatever default content we have, we do our own thing. And that's when it's quite useful to go into the free mode. That's also, of course, that's when we only query the language 3 and not the language 0. But that's something side effect. Pages always need a default language, but we'll get to that. That's I also added some funny things next to that, because some people, especially this guy in the orange shirt, Stefan, who took the photo, complain about the page module, because there's this mixed mode and connected mode and free mode, and actually it does not have anything to do with whatever it is in here. It has something to do with the database. I'd rather go with this one, but it's still not reflecting. The page module is not reflecting how it's rendered in the front end, and I think it should. But that's just takeaway, that's where you configure it, and that's where the source of truth is. If we have the page module, and if you just about languages all the time, and it's like that was the easy part. So we have this example side, you know, there's significant others, past perfect, in live workspace. We've understood that, and then we have these people who edit stuff that should get live tomorrow, should go live tomorrow. We love workspaces and past perfect auch morgen. These are the changes that the editors have done in this typo 3 setup. And what happens is now we have 4 records. So now it gets really complicated, maybe. So we have 15 and 16s, and they haven't changed because these are the ones who are live. And we have 17 and 18, and they are different. We have a couple of more columns that are now relevant. T3 were VSID, OID, and state. So, and the state field is just because I felt like I should add it. But that's for the workspaces talk next year. WSID means, I just told you about this workspace, right? Workspace is just a TCA table, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Workspace ID, and that's why there's the 1 in there. So imagine my colleague changes the site, changes the title of the page, and I change the title of the page, but we're in different workspaces. Then we'd have more records, but with different workspace IDs. And then the OID stands for online ID, I hope. It wasn't my invention, but I think you get the point that it's also connected. That's the default language, 17 in the preview workspace, and the 18 is the translation to it. So the translation has number 16. The online version is number 16. But then the alternate parent, localization parent, is 17. So there are some connections. And if you like tables and numbers, you see that this one does not have any connection to the others. It doesn't care. And the others somehow always reference over 1 or 2 hops to number 15. So workspaces we could also describe as kind of variants. So what happens is we load the page with the ID 15 and we are in a workspace. We also always check about this. Oh, we're in a workspace. So we actually check for online ID 15 and workspace ID 1. And if there's no record found, and this happens to all records if you're in a workspace. So if you imagine you have a page with, I don't know, news records, let's say 20 news records that get rendered, we always check all of the news records one by one if they have versioned or a different version in the versioned record. That's how I call it. If there's nothing found, we'll just keep the online version. Remember how with the language fallback, we do the same thing in a workspace. And if there's no record found, we'll just keep the live one. And if we found one, we replace everything except UID and PID from the default language, and maybe some 1 or 2 other things. Because, again, we always link to the live default. That's the naming that these gurus who invent the recent stuff came up with, the live default, the live version in the default language. So we replace everything again. We're still in the default language. But then if we add languages to it, this is how it looks like live default. We then do the translation stuff, and then we check the translation also is modified, because in our case, this person changed everything. And that's like everything you need to know. that's the order. And once you know the order, you have understood language, and you know that it's like just replacing everything except UID and PID, you're good to go. So maybe this looks easy, but some people ask me, why is Typo 3 making it so complicated? One of the reasons is that it's been like this for a long time, of course. And to it's like for all cases, that's why I came with this side and I screen that I broke something that they use for. So let's get consistent. So the only thing we've tried until now is to make it less complicated. Also with workspaces and also with XSpace and the whole fallback chain log, which I just explained, actually works in a multi-step setup. I didn't show it to you, but imagine you have English as a default language, and then you have German, then you have German Germany, and you have Switzerland, and then German Austria, and you can do multiple hops between that if you want to. And the cool thing about it is that it actually works the same in the whole front end for any kind of record you retrieve, like news in XSpace or not XSpace, whatever you want to do. And the good thing about overlays, why I like the overlays, is that it actually keeps the sorting. So imagine again the default language and you have 5 continents. It doesn't matter how the translation looks like, because we always take sorting and order of the default language and then go into the translation mode one by one. Some people then open tickets like, hey, if the question isn't shown either, of course, always get the default language first. So there are a lot of reasons why things work that way. Again, but if we find better solutions, that would be great. Because I would say in an ideal world, we would never need overlays because everything's just somehow there in each language. They know exactly what we have with the free mode. We just say, hey, we'll just take everything from language 3. But I wanted to do that, but the last missing pieces, there's this translation initiative working on that, is what about the language all? Maybe you've seen that. And if we just do the free mode, we could not properly do fallback chain. So we need to keep the fallback chain somewhere in sync and make sure everything, once somebody adds something in German, that German Austria knows I need to be updated because I might do fallbacks. So this is kind of complicated, but there's no solution. I could just remove it and then people would scream again. So I try to avoid this. I just try to fix bugs and make it consistent. And with workspaces, that you're like, okay, why do you always use this online live default thingy? And you're like, okay, I changed the headline. No big deal. I understand the whole thing. But what happens if you create a new page between page A and C, page B? How would this reflect with the overlays and the whole querying stuff? So that's quite complicated. And in version 11, we've simplified a lot of things, but we always need to consider the whole overlay part and this chain you've seen before, how this works. Because another solution is actually to copy all the content that we have. If we say, hey, let's create another blog post preview into a workspace. So there was this one guy who actually came up with his master thesis to say, every time we create a new workspace, we just create a new database. And I'm like, we have a lot of data then because we have large projects. Maybe it's not the best idea. It's actually quite cool to think of it, that the only thing you change is added to the database. The only 2 records you modify, the 2 news records, are are overlaid. Everything else is just like live. It's actually, I think, not complicated, maybe under the hood. So for both of these things, we actually save disk space, but we have additional queries because each hop for each language is like the context API tells me language 3, workspace 1. So we always need to do additional queries. We save disk space, but we have additional database queries, and I really don't like database queries. So of course, workspace stuff is not cached because you don't need to cache it because you only need to preview it. But just this week, there's this guy, Stefan Burg. I heard he's famous. He introduced a feature called common table expressions. That's also one of the reasons why we update to the latest MariaDB and MySQL versions, because it's a database feature to do the overlays technically inside the database. And he just added an internal API, and we actually used it for Workspaces overlays for this week, or since this week. And it's what it means is the whole hopping stuff and merging stuff is done in one single SQL query. That means no PHP that needs to deal with it and no additional checks. The only thing you need to do, of course, is to just use the APIs that are provided for you. Yeah, thanks, Stefan. Before we get into the APIs, the other thing I really do is read the database. And if you just explain, it's good. There's another field, so syslanguage UID, historical reasons. You zero, and it would be cool to actually get rid of the default language topic. So if you just want to create a page in Portugal, it's not possible right now. We'll get to that. But the language ID is actually the stuff you know from the site configuration. You have the localization parent, and then there's a localization source field, which is not relevant for this talk. That's why I won't add it here. But it's pointed to the translation parent, as explained. The online ID, the workspace ID, because we have multiple versions, and state. And the state is a number between -1 and 4. All the live records, they are in, and they're 0. Or move something to a different page, then the PID will change. And this kind of stuff needs to be remembered in the database. And the state field tells us about this. Or imagine you have a page or you have a content element and you want to delete it, but you want to preview it first. Let's say a slider without 1 inch. How do you define, hey, this was inside the there's a PHP enumeration file called version state, and it's quite well documented. So these fields for workspaces are also quite well documented since 3 years, if you're into the nerd stuff. But now let's jump into the APIs. One of the classes I really like almost is the page repository class. Even though it's called page repository, it does everything for you with the context API. You create a new page repository with a specific context, like language ID 3 and workspace ID 1, and then you say get record. And you get the record with the right language overlay and version overlay. If you want to do that explicitly because you do some nasty database stuff on your own, just use the page repository and call version all and get language overlay, where you can actually say, translate this to another language with the specific fallbacks. So it's all done for you. If you use XBase, XBase is using the page repository, and the content object renderer is also using page repository. That's TypoScript. And if you've been to the doctor session, I can only recommend page repository with a lot of PR14 events if you need to some special handling in some special case for some special language in some special page. So I have one example where Japanese should reflect the state except for the jobs page, because on the jobs page, Japanese job offers are not connected, but are free. So I just hook into that, check for Japanese, check for page ID, and then say just go into free mode. You can do ugly stuff with that, but it's really helpful. And so that was one of the goals, that I tried to get everything through page repository, because then you don't have to worry about it anymore. For the backend, it's not as cool, but there's a backend utility class. It's not as but just get record and get record visual workspace overlay. It does the workspace overlay for you automatically, and then there's also get record localizations. And I don't know why this method actually returns multiple localizations, because there's only one localization. I don't know. You can use this kind of stuff. I tried to introduce page repository to other places in the backend as well, because it actually helps you with a lot of stuff. So one thing I did not mention, because I don't want to bore you any longer, is the relation handler and relations. So if a news record points to a sysfile reference database field, etc., or database record, it gets really complicated. And this guy in the orange shirt and me screamed at each other already a couple of years ago, because we had different opinions on what is in the database, but we're still friends, okay? So relation handler is a topic for itself, and this is or not the relation handler, but what is stored in the database. But the relation handler is what resolves everything for you. So like, okay, I have this. I'm in Workspace 1 with language 3. Give me all the relations to or give me all images that are connected to this record, and this is what the relation handler can do for you. And if you write stuff, then I recommend to only use data handler, even in the front end, to fix something. If you deal with translations and versionable content, and then don't use XBase right now. That's something we're working on, because all the stuff that I've shown you is about reading, and everything that's about writing is still in the making. Reading should be most of the time, should be fine for you. Then I explained to you the weird things, in case you've seen language all. People really like that. But as mentioned, imagine you have a page with 5 content elements, and the third one is language all. You can kind of, like, there's no way to say you translate other records, and you cannot sort them differently. It's really complicated, because language all is still kind of in the default page or default language rendered. It's kind of complicated. And it's also, of course, there for historical reasons. And the good thing is, once we merged pages and pages language overlay in version 9.0, we did not introduce this for pages, because that would make it more complicated. So for pages, there's another uncool feature. That's a database field pages L18 and CFG. So again, the problem with a 18 and a 10, where you can say, okay, I only have this page. I need this for this convention in Spain, but I need to create it in English first. So you create the English page and check hide default language, and just do the Spanish translation for the page, and then just add content in Spanish. And you can, even though translation exists. I don't have really good use cases for this, but sometimes it's exactly the Switzerland stuff. And the second checkbox can be inverted with this great option, hide pages if not translated by default. And then it's inverted and the label is shown differently. So it's really, really complicated. Depending on your use case, whatever you have, spend time with it. So I just wanted to mention it, that it's just not following some other policies. So what you need to know, except for these weird things, the thing you need to know is what are when they are used. I hope you got this by now. And if you don't, please approach me and I try to write this down. And I also want to tell you, as long as you use Typo 3 core APIs and not using Query Builder yourself, you're safe. If you use Query Builder yourself, we can do another talk about this, how to do this properly. And basically, if you use Query Builder yourself, I can shorten it. Just use page repository afterwards, and you're also safe. You need to understand the database fields and the database table. And always remember to link, we always link to the default language in Live Workspace because the record always exists. As remembered, this is always there. Okay, that's it. I pause now and I'm open for questions if anybody's still awake. No questions, perfect.
So this week, or in the last day, there were many talks about accessibility, and it's a hot topic right now. And there are some cases where pages would be, I guess you can say, translated. For example, easy language for some people, and like replacement videos with I don't know how to say it in English, Gebärdensprache, and I don't know if language overlay would be a solution right here, because you would need to reference the main language again. Like it's another nesting of language overlays, I guess. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, there's a different content management system that works with a functionality called dimensions for workspaces and for languages. This is just my demo site. And what I do usually is I create a new language and you're completely free to do whatever you want. You can actually go with easy language. We actually do this in all of our projects. So every kind of different languages is also, it's not bound to anything, to any locale. Maybe there's a post about locales from my site available somewhere, but you just go with fallback and go with German, and that's it. So that's how I would handle it. I was always do it like this, and that's how people get to 120 languages. So it gets more complicated with languages and regions and markets. That's a completely different topic. But for everything that's accessibility language and accessibility language, go with just another translation. The key part for everybody who's doing a larger project. So we usually deal with corporate projects with lots of market and languages, is defining the default language. The default language should also always be the one where most of the stuff should fall back or most of the content should exist. So these corporations, okay, we go with English.